I can't explain what I saw on the trail one summer evening. This experience happened to me when I was 14 years old. I hadn't spoken to anyone about the event since it happened, not even my significant other. I'm 20 years old now, about to double major with my first 2 degrees in psychology and anthropology. Recently, for reasons unknown to me, the memories of this strange happening have resurfaced and continued to plague my waking thoughts, as well as my unconscious and subconscious. As we're taught in psychology, talking about the situation could help with the repressed trauma, so here goes nothing. I live in the high desert mountains of Southern California, situated just a bit below the Sierra Nevadas, about 30 minutes west of the Mojave. My town is no booming metropolis. At the time, our largest market was a Kmart, one of the last still in business, I might add, and we only had 4 stoplights in the entire town. This takes place in a subsection of the town, about 13 miles from the shops, banks, and restaurants, in a small community largely inhabited by retirees. It's smack dab in the middle of summer, and the temperatures were well in the high 90s to low 100s. My night routine would consist of walking my Australian Shepherd. However, I would wait until it was almost dark to avoid the heat. I grabbed my phone, a small pocket knife, some headphones, my pup, and set out for my nightly walk. My community is also home to a significant amount of equestrian riders, as well as some cattle ranchers. The trails I walked were designated horse riding trails, set in between the pastures. That night I had decided to take the horse trail that stretches for approximately 2 miles between back-to-back paddocks. It's basically just a long, narrow trail that goes in between 2 very large backyards. My ending destination was the Equestrian Center, a communal equestrian park where all types of horse riders could enjoy various activities. Making my way through the sandy terrain of the trail, it was nearly completely dark now. The sky was becoming a deeper shade of blue every time I looked up, and my dog was becoming harder to see. I estimated my arrival at the center to be about 15 minutes from my current position, so I sent a text to my mother. "Hey, I'll be at the Equestrian Center in about 15 minutes. You think you could meet me there? I'm a bit too tired to walk back." My mother replied pretty quickly, "Sure, I'll leave in 10 minutes." Now at this point, I was just outside the east entrance of the Equestrian Center, where the Enchanted Forest Trail connects to the straight trail I was on. It's sort of like a 3-way intersection. You can either go left into the Enchanted Forest, or go straight into the Equestrian Center. Before I reached the intersection of the trails, I noticed a shift in my dog's behavior. She suddenly became anxious and seemingly worried. She had her eyes fixated to the forest and stopped dead in her tracks. I played it off as another animal within the forest, like a bobcat or a boar or something, as they weren't very uncommon in my area. I gave her a slight tug on her collar, although she was still incessantly focused on that spot. With a little more convincing, I was able to get her to move forward, pushing towards the Equestrian Center, where my mother would be waiting for our arrival. At this point, we had walked enough that it was nearly pitch black, with only the moonlight guiding me with its low light. There was just the slightest visibility, forcing me to turn on my cell phone's dim flashlight. Entering the Equestrian Center now, I noticed something that startled me immensely. A very tall person, a man, I think, about 10 to 15 feet into the Enchanted Forest Trail. He had his back towards me, standing eerily still. His head was facing the sky, and his hands were open, palms pointing in front of him while his arms were at his side. He was very tall, approximately 6 feet, slim build, short dark hair, and was wearing what looked to be light blue scrubs, or at least a very thin blue napkin-like material. He was completely barefoot. What startled me the most was his demeanor and what he was doing. His stance alone was enough to scare anyone in that setting, but as I approached him slowly, I could see that he appeared to be shaking in place, vibrating or slightly convulsing, but doing so while standing completely straight. It didn't seem like he had any control over it, although he remained his balance perfectly somehow. Scared and not entirely sure what to do, I called out to him. "Hello? Excuse me." I paused momentarily and raised my voice slightly with the next question. Sir, is everything all right?" When I said that, he stopped shaking suddenly altogether, but still didn't turn around or move another muscle. He remained in that same creepy position, completely still. For a brief moment, I thought I might have been imagining this whole scenario. I glanced down at my dog, though. She was also very concerned with the state and condition of this man and began to growl quietly. Till then, at that moment, I knew it wasn't in my head. When I looked up, the man had started to move closer to me, about 7 feet closer now, almost onto my trail's path. I had only looked at my dog for a split second, and yet somehow he had moved so far without making a sound at all. He still wasn't facing me either. His hands were still open, head facing up towards the sky. I wasn't about to stand around and see what this guy was doing, or what his intentions were. I slowly eased my way past him, towards the equestrian center as quietly as I could, before I felt I was at a safe enough distance to start sprinting away from the man. When I reached the first arena, I looked back into the direction of the forest, completely out of breath, and there the man was. The fucker was standing on the edge of the trail just outside the forest, watching me. I was too far away to see his face clearly, and frankly I don't think I wanted to. I couldn't make out his features. All I could see was his silhouette illuminated by the moonlight, peeking through the forest trail. I took off running with no intention of stopping until I found someone else. I had never been so happy to see my nagging neighbor Penny and her moody mare Jolene riding in the Milano area. She noticed my distress immediately, but due to her already harsh opinions of me, I just told her I had been on an endurance run and was very out of breath and tired. I wanted to avoid any small-town gossip as much as I could. Thankfully, my mother arrived with impeccable timing. During the ride home, I broke down in a state of paranoia, distress, and panic at what I had just seen. My mother didn't know exactly what to make of it, so she recommended I file a report with the police. About an hour after getting home, an officer showed up to take my statement. Following up the next day, the same officer claims to have went and checked out the area, but he didn't find anyone or anything out of the blue, apart from partials of some bare footprints. I guess there's nothing incriminating or suspicious about going for a walk without shoes, though. He played it all off as a joke and accused me of being under the influence, but I can assure you, I was completely sober. Nothing ever came of the incident. I attended weekly therapy sessions for almost 2 years following this event, and never went on walks by myself ever again. I had night terrors about the man as well, since he was so scary, and still do. I don't know what to make of it, and I don't know if I ever will. "5 years ago, when I was only 18, I was really hurting. My long-term boyfriend cheated on me, and he loved her more than he ever loved me. It drove me wild, and I started to act pretty reckless. I talked to a lot of people on obscure social media websites. One guy, Jack, seemed really sweet, and he was from around my area, though on my profiles I used a city nearby instead of the actual one I lived in. We started texting often, and it seemed like we had a lot in common. New Year's Eve came around, and I didn't have any plans, and I also didn't want to be alone. Jack said we could meet up at a hotel and party together. I met up with Jack, and one of the first things he did was ask me if I was really 18. I didn't think it was odd because I looked extremely young, and people pretty much asked me on a daily basis. I worked in retail, and customers would literally worriedly ask me if I was old enough to even be working there, so I thought it was a normal question. He made me show him my driver's license even to prove I was of age. I did, and then asked to see his in return. He flashed it so briefly that I only saw one thing: the year he was born, 1983. I spent 5 whole minutes pretending to act normal while secretly processing this. Jack was 32. 30 freaking 2. I quickly felt bad vibes from Jack. I hung out with him only 2 more times before seeing that he was truly a twisted man. He didn't have a car. He lived with his mom, and I wasn't ever allowed over. He insulted his mom and described her to me as a bitch. He always talked about hating cops. He was very vulgar and obscene, and to be honest, it grossed me out a lot. We went to a concert, and he tried putting his hands up my shirt and down my pants while I was talking to someone there. He took me to a storage unit he had, wanted to hang out there because we couldn't go to his place. Inside, there was only an air mattress and a container on the ground that he peed in. After that, I completely ghosted Jack altogether, but I never blocked him. Everyone asked me why I didn't do it, and I always responded the same thing. If he ever texts me that he wants to hurt me or find me, or threaten me in some way, I want to be able to receive that text and have a record, instead of having it go into a void unseen. He texts me every couple of months for about 1.5 years. Always totally delusional psycho stuff. Happy 4th of July. I wish you were here with me. You're a stupid slut with no brain. I'm crying imagining the beautiful life we could have together. And then it suddenly became, I'm so sorry, please talk to me, etc. He left me voicemails describing disgusting sexual things he wanted to do with me. And one day, I swore I saw him at the store I worked at. I started to feel a little scared, and I hid away in the back room for a bit. I thought I was seeing things, to be honest. Then it happened again, a few months later, and I was sure it was him, but he didn't see me. A few days later, it was confirmed when one of my coworkers told me, "Hey, someone named Jack came here looking for you, but you weren't there. I told him you weren't in that day. He asked for your schedule, but I also told him I didn't have it." That's when the terror hit me, and the reality set in that I was not safe. I went with my friend to buy pepper spray that very day. On the way there, my friend asked if I'd ever Googled Jack. I said the thought hadn't occurred to me. I did so right then and there, and a bunch of articles came up. They described how he sexually harassed, threatened, and assaulted many different women. He had a serious record, including strangulation, slashing tires on cop cars, all kinds of assault and battery, breach of peace, trespassing. There were news articles about him sending sexually explicit pictures to underage girls even. I saw his mugshots too. Seeing his mugshots online was yet another reality check. That same day, I was back in bed at home with my parents. All of a sudden, there was someone at my door, and my stepmom went over to answer it. "Hey, someone named Jack is here for you." She was confused. I immediately panicked and told her everything. She told him I wasn't there, and thankfully he left without a struggle. I finally called the police at this point. Saving every text and voicemail from him came definitely in handy, because I emailed it all to the officer handling my case. He responded that he was deeply disturbed by the voicemails, and the case was severely more sinister than I'd let on with the police in person. After that, I came in and gave my statements. They put a warrant out for Jack's arrest, and I got a full no-contact protective order against him. And during the 1.5 months it took them to find Jack, he visited my work one more time. The security cameras got it all on tape. He walked around the entire store, every department, and every aisle. Jack came to my house one more time even. I was laying outside in the pool in the backyard. My stepmom came out to tell me she was leaving for work, and that I'd be home alone that day. She started to drive off, but only a few minutes later, I could hear a commotion in the driveway, and my stepmom screaming. I could hear her yell, "Get inside right now, and call 911! I knew Jack was there. I instantly jumped off the floating bed I was on, swam like I never swam before, and bolted up the stairs into the house through the back door. I locked it, ran to the front door and locked that too, and ran into my room and hid in the closet, all with a crazy speed I had no idea I was capable of. I can remember hiding, hearing my heart beating, hearing the crazy breathing, and hearing the water dripping all over the hardwood floor since I didn't have a chance to grab a towel. When my stepmom came in, she told me that on her way to work, she saw a car that looked like the one Jack had when he came to see me that other time. On a hunch, she turned around and followed him, right back here. That blows my mind. If she didn't notice that car, make that connection, feel that slight gut feeling and turn around and risk her job for me, I don't know what would have happened. Thankfully, that was my last encounter with Jack. I haven't heard from him since, but I definitely still live in fear constantly. He's currently awaiting criminal trial. From 2013 to 2019, I worked in outdoor education at many different summer camps and outdoor education centers in Canada, mostly Ontario, but I did spend a season in the Rocky Mountains. Having grown up going to a sleepaway camp and eventually participating in month-long leadership programs with backcountry canoeing components, I was well prepared to lead a group of teen girls from a camp in Georgian Bay on a 2-week camping trip to the Temagami region during my first year as a counselor. The Temagami region is located between North Bay, Sudbury, and Tamims, Ontario. This region is home to many provincial parks, wonderful hiking and canoeing routes, and the Bear Island Indian Reserve. Our route was fairly typical, and beginning the Whitefish Falls region, ending at Highway 11 after 14 days of paddling, portaging, hiking, and campfire making. We had a satellite phone to check in with our camp director every day, and in case of emergency, we also had multiple exit points along the route. Until our second to last night, we were having a pretty fun and relatively uneventful time, besides some mild dehydration and the usual scrapes and bruises. Near the end of our trip, though, we were doing some free camping on the shore of an uninhabited island in Bear Lake that is recognized as part of the Bear Island Indian Reserve. It's a very beautiful area, and we were across from the main island that the majority of the 250-person population inhabits. We had put out the fire and gone to bed, when about an hour after falling asleep, I was suddenly jarred awake by the loud sound of a motorboat. Obviously, this isn't that weird, because it's a really large lake and many people use boats to reach the mainland or their homes on the secluded islands. However, it was around 10 p.m., and things have been very quiet for the last few hours. The motor cut out, and I could clearly hear the sounds of an argument. It sounded like at least one man and a woman, because they were very angry and yelling at each other. I couldn't hear anything specific, though, because they were quite far offshore. Suddenly, the woman screamed out, and I heard a splash into the water. After that, complete silence. At this point, I was pretty freaked out, and hoping to God my girls hadn't woken up and heard that. But I wasn't that lucky, because I could immediately hear talking from their tent, and I could tell they were very scared. I was about to unzip my door and look out to see if maybe the boaters had had an accident or something, when my whole tent lit up. The light slowly panned across me and onto the tent my girls were in. That made them all immediately quiet. In a normal volume, I was able to tell them to stay absolutely still. The light panned back over to my tent, and then over to theirs again. I can only guess that it must have been a sort of boat with a searchlight on it. If anyone has any ideas of what type of boat it could be, please let me know. After an eternity, that was probably only about 5 minutes, the light was turned off, and I heard the motor engage and fade as the boat drove away from us. I immediately found the satellite phone and called our camp director, who gave us the phone number for the local police. I called them, and they said they would forward the information I gave to the local native detachment on Bear Island. I don't think any of us slept that night. I got up at 5 a.m. to take my canoe out and take a look around to see if I could see anything. I thought maybe someone had fallen overboard and had managed to swim over to shore. Obviously, I didn't find anyone, and there was nothing floating in the water either, although it is a pretty deep body of water. None of us wanted to camp one more night there, so I called the camp and had them head out to the pickup point a day early. We paddled like hell and didn't really talk much at all. I think none of us really wanted to speculate about what we might have heard and what would have happened if we'd made noise or moved when that light was over our tents. I've thought about this a lot over the years, but whenever I've told people the story, they've been quite skeptical. I recently started looking into missing persons cases in the area, but without much luck. If anyone reading this is familiar with Indigenous issues in Canada, though, there's an epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and the cases usually always go unreported or unsolved. In April of last year, my boyfriend and I were walking home from our friend's house. I had just finished my first year at college and wanted to go out and celebrate and have some fun. We live in a rural town, and our friend lived on the far side of it, so our walk was about a half an hour or so. I had a drink or two and smoked some of the joint they had rolled. Smoking makes me paranoid, and this night was no different. Anyway, we left at maybe 10 or 11 p.m., and everything was perfectly normal until we got to the end of the long street that would eventually lead to my house. This street always felt so long to walk. It felt like hours could pass and you could barely make a dent in the amount of steps made. The street we turned onto this road was maybe 10 or so blocks from my house. A few minutes after we turned onto this road, I began to feel like something was off. My boyfriend said that I was stoned, and reminded me that I'm already a pretty paranoid person to begin with, and honestly, I really am. This white pickup truck was parked in front of some house. It suddenly turned on and began to slowly drive away and would then park. I watched it to see if it was just me being paranoid or not, but it proceeded to stop a couple of houses down and sat there with the car still on. As soon as we'd get close, it would drive away, always parking just a little further up the street. This continued until we got to the end of my street. At this point, I kept telling my boyfriend that I wasn't paranoid. This truck was definitely fucking with us. He, for his part, had gone quiet. A couple of houses down from mine, the truck drove to the end of the street, my house, on the corner. There's a dead end right by my house because we live right next to a river. It stops for a moment at the dead end and proceeds to turn on their high beams and began to slowly drive right towards us. My boyfriend stuck his arm out in front of me, stopping me from walking any further as this truck continued to approach. My house was so close, yet so far away. This truck slowly drove by us. The windows were tinted, but we could make out two silhouettes. Because they had blinded us, we didn't think to look at the license plates or even the model of the truck. I swear, I felt like that night was the night I was going to die or worse. My thoughts hurled around in my mind, and I could see that my boyfriend was in the same mindset. He was being pretty quick on his feet. He waited until the truck disappeared from sight and took my hand before racing right to my house and locking the door. He had thought about turning down one of the other streets so we could try and lose them, but he figured he'd wait until they were out of sight to book it to my house so they couldn't see which house we went in. We looked out one of the front windows very carefully and could see this truck coming back into view and driving around the block slowly, presumably looking for us. This went on for a good 10 or so minutes. I called the police to inform them that we had been followed, but without the plates or model, they could only keep their eyes open for suspicious white trucks. I was adamant that these people had to know one of us, if not me, because they drove until they were right beside my house. Whether they knew it was actually my house or not, I can't say for sure. My boyfriend tries to insist that it was probably just a bunch of kids trying to mess with two people out on a night walk, but honestly I don't believe that. A few days later, we heard that someone was picked up and last seen in a white truck. Since that night, there have been stories all over the paper and online that people have been getting grabbed and were trafficked in the area. I'm still seeing those reports even today, which prompted this unsettling memory. It makes me wonder if they were some of these people, and if they were they after both of us or just one of us? Or were they truly just a bunch of assholes trying to mess with us? Either way, I don't care to ever know or find out. Whenever I see a white truck, I become on edge. It may be a bit silly, but the events of that night are still always fresh in my mind. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. All of the stories used in this video are used with the permission of Killer Orange Cat. Links to his YouTube channel and his Reddit where I got all these stories will be in the description below. If you guys enjoyed the video, please feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. It really helps me out with the algorithm. If you do decide to subscribe, make sure you hit that bell button so you can see all the videos I post in the future. I try to make at least one true scary story video every couple of days. Nowadays it's more like one a day, but that's not all the time. Special thanks to my artist friend Alan, who does all of the artwork for my channel. Links to his social media will be in the description below. If you'd like to send me a message for whatever reason, maybe you'd like to submit your own story for me to read, you can go ahead and take a look in the description where all of the links to my social media will be as well. You can send me a message on any of those, and I will try to read it as quickly as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, the type if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Please make sure you also include proper grammar as well, and try to include as much detail as you are comfortable with sharing. If you guys like my content on this channel, I also have two other channels. Links to those will be in the description, and you can also find them just on my channel page. They are called Darkest Hour and Mr. Blue Skies. I do disaster documentaries and true crime documentaries on them respectively. Feel free to check those out if you'd like. Overall though, guys, I think that's pretty much it for now. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.